Hi everyone, it's very nice to be here with you. This isn't really a presentation, it's going to be a story, a heavily illustrated story with pictures. And I'm going to be talking about Southbank Centre and where it started and how we've got to where we are today. Just to remind you, if you don't know, Southbank Centre's an incredible riverside site, 21 acres on the southern banks of the Thames, in between the London Eye, the National Theatre, so it's the bit that's sandwiched in between. It comprises the Royal Festival Hall, which is a Grade 1 listed building, the Queen Elizabeth Hall and Purcell Room and the Hayward Gallery, and all the spaces in and around, so roofs, undercrofts, walkways, so the whole kind of the whole set of ways that people can experience those buildings. The story began 100 years after Martin's story in 1951 with another great exhibition. It's not an accident, actually, that it's exactly 100 years later, because the government, the British government of that time, wanted to have a festival to allow the people of all four nations of the United Kingdom to imagine a future that was very different to the one that to the life that they'd experienced during the Second World War. So it was very literally and truthfully based on the idea that people had been living through a time when they thought there might not be a future at all. People had suffered personal loss, buildings had been destroyed, London was a bomb site, etc., etc. Well, not just London. I mean, there were bomb sites all over Britain and much of Europe and indeed the world. And so they wanted to make this huge creative gesture, and they wanted to involve the whole country. And they did involve the whole country. So everybody from the Shetland Islands to the tip of Cornwall to people in Northern Ireland all joined in. It's very interesting when you talk about brand today and how protective people are of their brand. They had an unforgettable brand. I'm sure you would all recognise the symbol designed by Abram Gaines, which is as familiar to young people now as it was then, and yet they were totally generous with that brand. So, you know, the Women's Institute in Glasgow could knit it, and the Boy Scouts in Devon could have a cake sale made out. So they were incredibly generous, and the effect was that the whole country felt that they were part of this festival. And the centrepiece of the festival was the exhibition on the land, which is now where Southbank Centre stands. It was, I wasn't there. I've talked about it so much that I feel as if I was there. It's fascinated me from being a child. My own mother had a photograph album. She'd been an evacuee, you know, she'd had all the disruption to her life that, you know, that so many people had had. But the moment when things started to change was the moment when she went on a day trip to the Southbank exhibition. Because here was education, science, space travel, cooking, art, all in one place, and all described very, very memorably, I think, by the Observer journalist Patrick Donovan as a brief city. He said it's going to be a city, and it's going to be an ideal city in which we can build the world that we all feel we now need, having gone through what we've gone through. It was full. I mean, I'm not going to do the whole architectural history of the Festival of Britain, much as I might like to, but it was filled with amazing buildings that were really unlike any that anyone had seen. And I have to say, working in the Festival Hall today, it still has that impact on people. You know, tiny children who will come in and think, wow, this building is modern, it's light, it's different. Remarkable features about this landscape were that it was designed often by very young people. So, you know, we've been hearing already about students. One of the most memorable pavilions, the Lion and Unicorn Pavilion, which was the one that spoke about British character, was designed by two students at the Royal College. There was a complete freedom belief, you know, that ideas could come from anywhere, that probably the best ideas were going to come from the youngest people, the liveliest minds. And also, it's not lost on me, that also they didn't have enough money for any of these pavilions. And they knew that young students and people who were going to stay up all night for 6 weeks were going to make them. The shot tower there was one of the bits that was on the site already. It was also the site of a display of embroidery by all the women's institutes in Britain at the time. They all made patches to depict the history of Britain from 1851 to 1951. And it stayed as part of the festival. It cost, I mean, interestingly, when we get to talk about today, it had a boundary around it. You know, you arrived at the brief city, and you basically had to pay to go in. so there were turnstiles. It cost about £8 by today's prices. And I was just speaking, funnily enough, I gave a different kind of talk earlier today and met a couple of people afterwards. They said, well, we couldn't go because we couldn't afford it, because £8 was quite a lot at the time. I mention it here because these people, and this is one of the photographs from our archive, are watching, and this is true, you have to take this on trust, they're watching a release of balloons which happened every day at the exhibition, and each red balloon had on it a free ticket, and they just let them out into the atmosphere. So there's wonderful film footage of children scrabbling on bomb sites to get at these balloons, to get a ticket to go to the Festival of Britain. Those people are watching the balloons. The Skylon, despite its maker's assurance that it didn't stand for anything, it didn't mean anything, it didn't do anything, stood as an unforgettable symbol for, my estimate would be, everyone who went. I've had the privilege of meeting many people over the years who saw it, and they all talk about it, they all mention it. They mention the Guinness clock, they mention the Skylon, the Dome of Discovery, and so on. It was absolutely huge, this brief city. It was 28 acres, so 7 acres more. It was land that was requisitioned by the government, so they did demolish housing in order to create it, something that's often forgotten. There was a tree until quite recently on the site, which was in a garden of one of the houses that was demolished. There was a very elderly man who used to come and look at the tree because he remembered his dad planting it, and it somehow survived the exhibition land being prepared. It's not an accident that it's almost opposite the Houses of Parliament. It was deliberately designed to be a provocation to the establishment in a way, and therein lies part of the next part of my story, really. The Royal Festival Hall, maybe it goes without saying, is the only bit that's left, Grade 1 listed. Those of you who might be keen archaeologists or just, fans like me, there's bits you can find. There's a few steps to the Dome of Discovery. There's a funny little fountain behind one of the railway arches near Waterloo. But basically, it's just the Festival Hall left. Just one more slide on the Festival of Britain. It was in colour. And again, we're used to colour. Colours are very much a part of modern life, I would say. But again, it was absolutely said over and over and over again in contemporary accounts of the time that London and the whole of the world had felt black and white. And suddenly, everything was in this vivid, confident colour. The festival ended 3 months after it started, which was always planned. It was always going to be a brief city. But the way in which it finished is, really sets the scene for what happened next, because Winston Churchill, having not been voted in by the British people, having won the war, was re-elected as Prime Minister in the September of that year. And in something that I think you can really only describe as sort of vengeance, he didn't just take the exhibition down, he destroyed it. I mean, there were bulldozers sent in to destroy it, and that was what was intended. So nothing was kept in any kind of systematic way. I spent the afternoon with museum professionals, all sort of horrified at the fact that there was no sort of sense we must save this, we must keep this. It was just thrown away. I mean, the kind of urban myths about the Skylon being thrown into the river, and there's a man in Peckham who's made a greenhouse out of a bit of it, and so on and so on. But it wasn't treated reverently. And the thing that's really critical in terms of what happened later was that it wasn't just the architecture that was destroyed. What Churchill wanted to destroy was the ideology behind it, which was that ordinary people and people at large could determine their own future and could have a contribution to make to what the world might look and feel like and how it might behave. After the festival hall became what you might just call a traditional concert hall, very posh, certain kinds of concerts. It sounds slightly disparaging, wonderful artists came there, but it stopped being the magnet for the people. You had to have a ticket, you had to know what you're doing, you had to dress a certain way, and so on and so on. In the late 1960s, part of the site that had been laid waste after the 1951 exhibition was occupied by two new buildings, the Hayward Gallery and the Queen Elizabeth Hall and Purcell Room. Very, very interesting. They're very, very different in look and feel to the Festival Hall. But the architects, who were part of the London County Council Architects Department, Some of them there was a big team, and it's interesting the number of names, but a group of them went on to found Archigram. They built what they called, what's the phrase, a mapping terrace for people. So they built these huge concrete structures that had auditorium and galleries in them that were of a high standard. But what they wanted was people to crawl all over them. They wanted it to be in the spirit of the Festival of Britain. And in fact, I've got another slide later on, but when Dennis Crompton visited the site a couple of years ago and saw some of a garden that we've made on one of the roofs, he literally wept because he said that's what we intended these buildings to be. We didn't intend them to be concrete bunkers of sort of faceless concrete. That's the Hayward Gallery today, actually. So what happened after the 50s and 60s was a period that we like to, those of us that work there now, that look after the place now, call a period of forgetting. So everything was forgotten. It was forgotten there'd been a Festival of Britain and a South Bank exhibition. It was forgotten that these visionary young architects had come in the 60s. And the buildings just operated as kind of, okay cultural venues, but not cultural venues that reached out to the town or that were in any profound sense educative. I mean, there's exceptions. There was the Ernest Reed concerts in the Festival Hall. There were schools programmes in the Hayward. But the overall feeling was that it was really something for the few and not for the many. And the site was not looked after physically. There was no money to look after it. And so it gradually got tattier and tattier and tattier. And with it, its original idealism got tattier and tattier and tattier. Around the beginning of this century, I mean, I'm sure those of you in this room, given what you all do, will know that all through the 90s, people were sort of trying to sort the South Bank out and saying it's a dreadful basket case and different schemes came and went and there was flurries of excitement followed by desperate disappointment and so on and so on. But nothing was achieved that made any kind of significant difference. And it was only when Rick Mather Architects came on to do master planning of the site and suggested that an incremental approach could be taken instead of trying to sort out the whole thing. And the principal suggestion that was made by Rick Mather Architects was that we should just deal with the Festival Hall, which sounds very simple, but it was starting to, it had been loved, albeit that it had been forgotten in terms of what it symbolised, but it was just falling over and worn out, and all the services and so on. I don't have architectural language, but all the things that are meant to happen in a building didn't happen. Sorry, excuse my layman's language, but therefore the scheme to transform the Festival Hall as an architectural place, which was undertaken by Allers and Morrison, sought to just remedy that, if you like. It was a huge job. So a place like this used to be the box office, and the entrance to the Festival Hall was just under those columns there, and there was this road which divided the Festival Hall from the building, the poor Festival Hall that had been in this sort of oasis of completely utopian landscape, had this service road in front of it, and you had to kind of climb up on there to get to the river and under to get into the box office and so on. Following the scheme, it turned into this. And at this point, I just mention what's going to be, in a way, the sort of the main theme of the second bit of my talk, which is that at this point, the architectural remembering sparked an ideological remembering. And a kind of, what is this place anyway? So all the people in the 90s who'd said, what are we going to do with it? And it's all a mess. But there was a moment of complete clarity, which was, it's obvious what this place is. It's a festival site. That's what it is. It was established as a festival site with festival buildings and festival activities, with all that means. So I'm going to show you in a minute, alongside this sort of sense that we were sorting it out architecturally, we began this absolutely phenomenally exciting investigation into what the place actually meant, what it meant not just for London, but for the whole of the UK and indeed globally. So again, the walkways, which was such a sort of proud part of the 1968 vision, had just become completely, that walkway just didn't go anywhere in the end. It did at one point go to Waterloo Station, but by this point it literally didn't go anywhere. So you walked to the end and you just came to a dead end and you had to go back. And it obviously disrupted the potential of squares like this. Once those walkways had gone, we were able to put on events like this. This is a version of S.T. Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Those of you that know this poem will know that it's about a man who haunts a wedding, and it was presented by school children as a wedding feast. You can see, the joie de vivre of using the space in that way. Markets became possible on that space. This is the charming road in between the festival hall and what we call the festival wing, the eastern side of the site. This is still not attended to, as you'll know if you've been down recently. But through festivals, we show what we show what it can feel like. So that's actually the same road, cleaned up, traffic moved out, and festival ideas moved in. This is the roof of the Queen Elizabeth Hall, known as the sun deck. This is what it looked like until about 7 years ago. You couldn't even go on it, because when the DDA came into force at the end of the 1990s, we couldn't afford to put in a lift for people to be able to get to it, so we just had to close it. It was literally in chains, as was some of the other terraces of the Queen Elizabeth Hall. We began a social enterprise with a charity called Grounded Ecotherapy to turn the Queen Elizabeth Sun Deck into a garden. And it's now one of the most loved gardens in London, actually. I was extremely thrilled with this. Apparently, we're the most popular place in the whole of London for people who've met on internet dating sites to have their first date, which I think that's got to be a good thing, I reckon. The garden grows vegetables and fruit, and the amazing thing about it is, in terms of your theme this evening, is that because it's completely been cared for and developed by people who in other scenarios would be seen as society's losers. So they're all people who've been homeless or who've been battling with drug addiction. And through making this garden, they've become valid members of society. And that's not my words, that's theirs. They feel that they can look at someone and tell them how to grow a courgette instead of, I'm asking for money on the street or whatever. So it's got an incredible sense of social purpose. This is children working in the garden. And become a tremendously joyful place. I mean, I should just say, I'm not going to say an awful lot about commerce, but there's a little cafe in here as well, which we almost did as an afterthought. But our caterers, Company of Cooks, who run the catering operation in the festival hall, make more money in that little cafe than anywhere else on the site. And in doing that, they allow us to thrive, survive, be resilient. Yeah. So I'm going to go really quickly now. I said to someone earlier I could talk forever on this. The Hungerford Bridge, you probably remember it. It used to be awful, sort of pooling. You felt dangerous, didn't feel very nice. So the routes into the place have improved. That used to be the route from, it's called Concert Hall Approach, but when you approached the concert hall, you met that. Now it looks like that. This is the van store just by the book market. And now we have a pop-up, Oaxaca. Oaxaca, this was only their second restaurant and it's their most popular outlet. So again, just huge commercial success, feeding charitable and artistic enterprise. Oops, stuck. So I've got 2 minutes, I think, to show you about 50 photos. I'm just going to go through them really, 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 really quickly. No, the presentation was the first bit. But Southbank Centre has regained its confidence through thinking about its architecture and remembering what that architecture was about and how it related to people and how it allowed people to learn and to find out who they were and what their place was in the world and what they wanted the world to be like. And I'm literally just going to give you, if I can make this button go quickly, we now have 20 festivals a year. They range in topics from focuses on, that's the festival hall, focuses on South Asia, Pakistan, Afghanistan. We've just had a wonderful festival about Africa with Kinshasa. There's Billy Bragg busking, our gamelan playtime. Every space, every nook and cranny is used to fill with a festival, which is the spirit of what happened in 1951, and the joy that it's bringing to people, and the ability to talk about difficult things, actually, because we use the word festival in the way that you might say that a funeral's a festival or a marriage is a festival. They contain meaning. For a festival to be more than just having fun and having a drink in the sun with your friends, it's got to give you a chance to find something out. And that's what we're doing at Southbank Centre now. There's no longer a barrier around the site. It's free to come in. A lot of the things we do 2,000 events a year, and half of those are free. That's Bryn Terfel. I can't resist showing you this. The great operatic baritone. He fills opera houses the world over. This is him on the level 2 terrace of Festival Hall singing with people. About 4,000 people turned up to sing with Bryn. So I guess your question about culture and education and city, I mean, I feel, I hope it doesn't sound glib, but culture and education are united in this place, which is like a city. It's a very little city, that brief city, but it has all the components that you might find. We had an inflatable church even 2 weekends ago, and I'm just going to leave you with that young man enjoying the sand on our Rainbow Park, which was part of a Festival of the World that we did during the Olympics. But there you go.